Well, welcome everyone to What is the Future of Auditing, a special live roundtable session right here at Exemplar Global's Future of Auditing Expo. I'm your host, Mike Richmond. Well, we're going to spend the next hour with three outstanding speakers. Jackie Stapleton, joining us today from Australia, where it's currently Wednesday morning, and Greg Hutchins and Bud Waitman from here in the United States, where it's Tuesday afternoon. Jackie, Greg, Bud, thanks so much for joining us today.
Mike, thank you.
We're gonna have a good time. But before we start our conversation, I want to set a few quick ground rules for all of us here and all of you joining us out there. We encourage your questions anytime at all during the session. Don't be shy, post your questions, and just use the discussion forum area, which is right there at the right of your screen, right over there. And you can just type in your questions, and then our tech team is gonna send them my way, and I will then pose them directly to our excellent panelists. Also, I want to note that the session is being recorded and it's going to be made available on demand. So if you're watching the recorded version, you can email any questions to me at mrichmond@exemplarglobal.org. And we'll then forward, of course, your questions on to Jackie, Greg, and or Bud. So what is the future of management system auditing? What's continuing education going to look like? How will the contours of this career change in terms of compensation, titles, opportunities? Which are the technical skills we're going to need to hone and understand in a changing environment that will more and more incorporate concepts like predictive maintenance, AI, machine learning, and the like? In short, today we're going to explore how we're going to learn, how we're going to earn, and how we're going to discern the best ways to audit efficiently and effectively. Now let's meet our speakers. Greg Hutchins is the founder of Certified Enterprise Risk Manager, CERM Academy. He's been evangelizing the future of quality as risk for more than 20 years. His company was among the first to provide audit training with one of the first ISO 9001 certification bodies in North America back in 1987. He's the author of Value Added Auditing and Risk-Based Auditing, which are available on Amazon. Jackie Stapleton is the founding director of Auditor Training Online, which is an exemplar global recognized training provider for courses in management systems auditing. Jackie is also a practicing contracted certification auditor for quality, environment, and OH&S management systems. And Bud Waitman is the founder and president of Qualified Specialists LLC, an organization that has been serving the oil and gas industry for more than 32 years. Bud is an exemplar global certified quality management systems lead auditor and an exemplar global certified environmental management system auditor as well. So panel, I've talked a lot already. Hopefully I won't have to talk too much more. Now, of course, it's your turn. So let's start with an open-ended question. In your view, what does the future of auditing look like? So Bud, why don't you get us started?
I think there's a lot of things to consider. It's quite huge, actually. So in order to move forward with that, I would like everybody to think about the subject of remote auditing, because that was obvious over the last 2 years. So if you looked up the subject of remote auditing just several years ago on the internet, there was not much to be found about it. Very little information. There were some books out of ASQ, but nothing much more. And then lo and behold, over the last 6 months, year, it exploded. There's so many articles on remote auditing. There's some really great stuff that discusses the types of equipment. I think that the industry has exploded and heard the call and has created some new technology for us. So I think the thing to remember about that is happened quickly. And it's to the standpoint, it's very impressive, right? If not astonishing. And then I think from there, it's going to be dependent upon the industry that you're in. So I'm in primarily oil and gas. My background's regulated industries. And so I'm going to look at it from a more critical aspect. And so I think part of it's going to include, how do you determine the criticality of auditing, right? Of the product or service that you're auditing, and what is the customer's input on that criticality? Are there any published guidelines and so forth? But that's just the high point. And then we can explore that a little bit later. Another thing is going to be the auditor's capabilities, his competencies, his or her competencies. What are they going to need to know for the future? And I think that's where it's going to really come in. It's going to be huge. And I think we can explore that just a little bit here and go on. But part of that's going to be Number one, I think every auditor needs to be a subject matter expert in something. It doesn't matter what something. I think that's going to get them recognized. And if they're a practitioner in being a subject matter expert, it's going to help tremendously. In addition to that, I think as Jackie, I would refer to part of what you do, Jackie, is being an integrated management system auditor. So you're auditing QHS&E, and I think that's going to be a way to go, especially as you get towards retirement age and start looking to say, look, I'm really not going to work full time, but I'm going to pick up an audit here or there, and I'm going to travel the world. And guess what? It's possible, right? It'll be very possible. So those are just some of the high points, but there's other deeper points I'm sure that we'll explore here in a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And Jackie, what do you, I mean, Greg, I'm sorry, Bud was picking up on this idea of integration, integrated system auditing, and ISO is, of course, is on that as well with the high level structure that they've rolled out in the past few years also. So obviously there's an idea that there needs to be value for the auditee. And the question is, how do we help bring that to the auditors themselves so that they understand how to think systematically as opposed to within silos of quality or environment or health and safety?
Yeah, absolutely. I can touch on the IMS side of it, and I do have a question for Bud as well, based on something he mentioned around competency. I've told you that in case I forget, and I don't know. So definitely with the IMS, and this is a story that I often share with people. You know, my first standard was quality, ISO 9001. It was like the 1994 revision.
Right.
I love quality. I still love quality. But I soon found that, especially when I went out working for myself, it was fine while I was a quality manager within a business as an employee. But when I went out into the big wide world as a contractor or a consultant, I soon learned that I would get more work if I also tagged on environment and OH&S. I had both of those. I did work within all three as an employee, but as I said, quality was my first love. So I just thought I'd infiltrate the world with quality. But yeah, I soon found and realized that, okay, I'm going to get more work. I'm going to get, and it's not just more work, I'm going to get sort of bigger players as well that are triple certified. And as Bud said, sort of that sort of broadens or opens the world up to you as well. So if that's what you're after, but definitely that's something that we always try and talk to our students about, is why not do the whole package? Like, you're here, you know, you're doing quality and they might be doing OH&S, like, why don't you throw on environment as well? That they're all going under the high level structure. They all have very common elements. So if you're doing one, majority of it are common elements with those unique sort of areas, you know, specific to environment, like your aspects, your compliance obligations, which are across both OH&S and environment as well, your hazard ID, risk assessment. And I can say that, but you can sort of pick that up and plonk it into any of the standards, really, like you mentioned around Greg before, around that risk-based, you know, approach for quality. It's always been there. It's just not as highlighted as OH&S, for instance. So, yeah, I do agree with the IMS side of things.
And Greg, I'm glad that Jackie mentioned that about risk, because, you know, quality, I mean, certainly I think we all have a love for quality as an entree. Many times it's an entree to management systems for many people. But, you know, you and I have chatted offline many times about quality and the future of quality and where risk fits into that. And I guess the challenging question is quality as a phrase, as a term, as a concept, is it passé?
Boy, so can I go to the question that Bud and Jackie really addressed? And let me
Yeah,
talk
sure,
about-
sure.
Okay. So I started with ISO, golly, in 87 with ISO 9001. And that was 87. 3 years later, they came up with a how to audit standard, which in 1990 was called ISO 10011.
Right.
Seven pages long.
7
In the
pages.
last, yeah, 7 pages long. Again, looking at the 20 system characteristics of a QMS. In that time it was 9187. So they came up with a how-to in 1990, and that was 10,011, ISO 10,011, 7 pages. The latest iteration is ISO 19,011, 2018, 47 pages, and it requires risk for planning the audit. Oh, let me go back. Managing, planning, conducting, and reporting the audit. Risk is all over the place. And by the way, that's the requirement, not the conditional, not the what if, that is the requirement for any management system audit. And that's going to impact 900,000 ISO 9001 companies that are certified. That's going to impact another, maybe 500,000, 27,001. Anyway, you get the idea. It's going to impact all of the requirements. So I'll just simply briefly list what I see as the future. I think risk-based audits are going to be a requirement for internal, first party, second party audit, customer supplier, and third party audits, which will be the certification body audits. Everybody is going to have to basically get on the same page, same level, and basically conduct risk-based audits. Second thing, the certification bodies, meaning the third-party registrars or whatever we want to call them, need to have much more time to conduct a risk-based audit. A risk-based audit takes more time. We've been doing these for 25 years. We've been doing it for state, federal agencies, offshore, all over the world. A risk-based audit takes 3 times, not 30%, 3 times to 5 times as much time as a regular compliance or process audit. And we have a lot of data to basically assert that. The second thing and I think this is the great thing, we gave a talk to CQI, Certified Chartered Quality Institute out of the UK. And we gave a talk early in the summer, and we basically, our contention, and we proved it with hard data from Indeed, that risk-based auditors make twice as much as regular type of auditors. Why? More knowledge is required, more what we would call assurance is required, and in general, more due diligence is required for a risk-based audit. So risk-based auditors in the US and the UK basically make twice as much. And I can share that data set with Mike, Mr. Richmond, and he can basically share it with anybody who's attending this thing. The other future that I see for auditing is clients will want new forms and levels of assurance. That's really two issues: new forms of assurance and new levels. So let's take about a low-level assurance would be what we would call an agreed upon procedure. You have a client and you agree to do some type of a procedure with a client. The auditee basically complies and you do some type of review, assessment. A higher level of assessment or assurance would be what we would call a QMS audit, a quality management system audit, specifically now risk-based audit. And a higher level assurance is what we would call a professional opinion. We're a professional engineering company. Over our engineering stamp, we provide a professional opinion. Now, the interesting thing is an agreed upon procedure is like X dollars per hour, US dollars. If we have to provide a higher level of assurance, like a risk-based audit, a QMS audit, we would go 1.25 or 1.5x. If we have to provide a professional opinion, much like a CPA firm or much like a a due diligence firm, we basically bill at 2x to 3x.
Mm.
In general, the higher level of risk, the higher level of assurance, the higher level of billables. So that's what we see as the future, Michael.
But
I hope
higher,
I
higher.
get too deep.
Well, we'll get there.
Okay.
Higher level of training too, though, right? I mean, you can't just come
Absolutely.
off the street and be able to do this. You need to be able to
Absolutely.
understand what that means.
Absolutely.
I'd like to throw something out there that would help expand this too, right? So if you look at ISO 9001, it was written in accordance with the thoughts behind ISO Directive Annex SL, right?
Mhm.
So
Yes.
based on that, ISO has 95 management system standards that they have published on their website. Now, what I'm looking at is as these standards become more popular, ISO's graded them. They've graded them in a scale that allows them to say, here's the ones we think are going to be the most critical and most mature, and here's where we're going in the future. And so they've graded them. So if I want to expand my experience, those may be the standards that I want to go after, right? And then because there's not that many auditors in those areas from what I know at this point in time. Have you guys seen anything like that? The experience in like, what is it, 5,500 for energy?
Yeah, that's one that comes up for me, but it seems to just always be the standard quality environment. OHS 27001
Right.
seems to be one that's sort of coming up. ISO 22000, which is food, is
Right.
another one. But again, there does seem to be a lot in the standard quality environment, OHS, that whole triple cert, but it's those other two. Like I'm trying to find someone for 27001 because I'm not an expert in that. And it's proving to be a struggle to find someone, that's right to help, with content. Because it is, well, I'm going to say it is quite new. I'll put not really, but it is out there, and so I think a lot of people are sort of dabbling in it, maybe, and then if there's not much work, they pull back.
Well, the neat thing about it is that the requirements are pretty much the same in all the standards, with the exception of maybe what Section 6 and Section 8 are the primary ones, and they go to the discipline-specific information, right?
Yep.
So you don't have to worry about like the old days of trying to match up 18,001, OSAS 18,001, 14,001, right?
Yeah.
And 9,001. And we're like, how am I going to do this? Nothing's balanced here.
Can I talk about 27,000? I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. Go for it, Greg.
Can we talk about 27,001 for a second? The standard's been around a long time. And essentially, the whole standard is based on two ideas: risk in the IT cyber area and what we call equivalent controls. There are a lot of things missing in the standard. The ERM, enterprise risk management, appetite for risk. There's a lot of stuff, but essentially it's very prescriptive. And this is what happens. A client will go, especially in the last couple of years, a client will come to somebody who's just entering the field of cybersecurity, who still has that mentality of, a shall and a compliance, a shall and a procedure, right? But ISO 27001 actually says, here's an area, and you have to basically select which controls are appropriate for that cyber area. So first thing, a judgment has to be made. It's not simply check the box or tick the box, right? It really takes a lot of judgment. And then what happens is that the client will come back to the auditor or the registrar and say, okay, this is great. Can you sign off on your evaluation? Now, the auditor is not understanding the legal ramifications, will say, sure, no problem. The registrar will say, no, we won't. What we have done is just simply follow that procedural type of risk type of controls in this cyber area. And all of a sudden, the lawyers come in and they say, we want a professional opinion over a license. In our case, it's an engineering license, which is where we come into the picture. So a registrar might have said, okay, this is going to cost 25, 30K. We come in and say, listen, for us to provide opinion, we have to redo the audit. And oh, by the way, it's going to cost you three times as much. And we're seeing that 20, 30% of the time for cyber.
So Greg, is that also including NIST requirements? Do your clients jump off from there to NIST?
Yeah. So NIST stands for National Institute for Standards and Technology. A 27001 audit is very low level. And then all of a sudden you put right on top of it the NIST standards. For us would be 37, NIST 837, NIST 852, which are the risk management requirements. Now, that's the next level above, higher level of assurance.
Right.
And then the client will say, no, we want very specific area audits for different type of what we call NIST 800s, critical infrastructure, forensics, for example. And all of a sudden that cost for the audit for detailed NIST 800s become 5x, 7x, not 70%, 700 times more than the initial ISO 31000. Initial 27001 audit. And that becomes very, it's much different. You have to provide a legal opinion, which we can over our engineering license. And basically what the client is doing is they're taking some of the risk over from the auditee and shifting it over to us. Because what we're doing is providing a professional opinion, which is really risk transfer. I don't know if I'm getting a little geeky, but that's
you're talking about defensibility. You're talking about an opportunity to, like, say, transfer the risk and have a client have a higher level of assurance beyond what Michael. Some of these other standards it can evolve with. But I can hear out there our attendees saying, okay, well, so what do I need to do to get in on that? That sounds really good. What does that mean in terms of getting myself prepared to do that work?
From my experience is, I've been involved in a lot of things, and I start reading, the 27001, and we start looking at procedures, developing, trying to do it internally. Then I'm going like Jackie's saying, okay, I need to get an SME in here, right? And then we've made inquiries on the NIST because there's work with potentially the DoD or maybe some other organizations. And I'm going like, ching, 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 ching. Not now, right? It's expensive. Yeah. So you really have to know what you're doing. To Greg's point, you really have to do it. And that's why I would seek an SME on that to help out.
Yeah, I think we've talked about different types of audits as well. And so, it depends on, I suppose, what types of audits that you are wanting to work in. So for me, as a certification auditor, well, I don't consult or advise. I'm not allowed to. So it's just, well, this is the requirement. This is what I've found as evidence, and then they need to fill that gap. So I suppose I just wanted to make sure everyone understood that there are different types of auditors, and absolutely the auditors that, say, Greg was talking about, that I've just written down, that consult, essentially, there's a higher risk because they're giving their opinion, their recommendations, and that's, as you said, Greg, sharing the risk. So it is a higher risk area that you will work in as an auditor. If that's, and I call that more of a consultant, you're working with people and you are advising. If that's what you want to do, then that's what you need to consider. However, if it's just certification audits, it is still very, I'll say, separated. We have to be careful of providing a recommendation or a corrective action on how to fix a gap. So we've got a little bit of a mix going on here, because for me, and thank you for that, Greg and Bud, because you sort of opened my world up, because instantly I just think of my world, and I don't take that into consideration. For a certification auditor, I'm going to throw this out there. I think the big thing in the future is that, and I hope I already do that, I'm conscious of it, is that we have to be real people. We have it. We're not, I always say, the quality police. We are not the quality police.
Right.
We have a common goal. We want our clients, our auditees, to succeed, and we are there working collaboratively. So as a certification auditor, I think, you know, you can know the standards back to front and, you know, blurt out all the technical words and, you know, try and make yourself seem as smart as you want to, but you actually need to be able to relate to people and build a relationship with them on that professional level. But it's that whole being approachable. So it's not just about learning what's in the standard. Okay, and that's what we teach. I'm trying to introduce a little bit more personality and personable rapport into our auditors to understand it's not just about the technical stuff, it's how you relate to people. You know, the language that you use, the questions that you ask, your body language is really, really important, those soft skills.
And
I think it's going to be even,
excellent points. Yep.
I think it's going to be even more important, right? So give this a thought. So what about audits in the future? So, you know, it depends on what the next thing is. We know we have a pandemic, a lot of remote, right? New improvements in remote auditing. But also, guess what? People or customers are looking for cost breaks, right? So the audits are going to become, as more people, more auditors get certified, audits are going to become more localized, right? So that's even more important to learn the soft skills that you're talking about, Jackie, and the technical skills that, Greg, you mentioned, and, you know, even the technical skills for what the customer does. So they're building, you know, a widget. Well, what's a widget look like? Well, I owe myself to go onto the internet and figure out what that is and find out what the performance criteria of the widget is before I audit, right? I don't want to come in looking totally daft. I want to at least come in and say, look, I have some subject matter knowledge.
Well,
Not
but
Yeah.
let me ask you this. Let me ask you and help me qualify this and quantify it a little bit. So when you're saying localized, you don't mean commoditized, right?
I mean that's a possibility too. But what I'm looking at is regional.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
The regions might be the United States, but even that is shrinking. Right. They're looking for more and more auditors that have all those key characteristics, all those competencies that could be the most versatile, and they could, you know, plop them around, let's say, the state of Texas, like where I'm from, right?
Yep.
That'd be more local travel.
So yeah, and I suppose with remote though, those types of people are a lot more accessible too.
I want to jump in because I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are starting to get some questions, and I want to make sure that I take some questions from the audience, so everyone listening out there knows that you can, and we want your questions. So please do email or chat them to us, and I'll get them onto our panel. So if I can interpret these questions for a particular one of you, I will. This one, I'm not quite sure who would be the best answer, so I'm just going to lay it out there. I am an internal auditor in a highly regulated industry, radiopharmaceuticals. So we are regulated by the FDA, NRC, and DOT. How does this apply? So interesting. And I guess what she's talking about is kind of the integrated, maybe what she's talking about is the integration of auditing.
Now what you're doing is you're going to have the overall, okay, guys, help me here, right? You're going to have the overall management system requirements, whatever that industry is requiring. Under that, or probably even higher than that, is the regulatory requirement, right? So if you just do an ISO QMS audit for a regulated industry, what's that worth? To me, nothing at all. Then you have to have, in my opinion, And the way we do it, we have specific audit checklists or checkpoints that have the regulatory information in it. So there's a difference between ISO 9001. ISO 9001 is in the road of conformity. Do you conform to 9001, yes or no? The regulated industry is in the road of compliance. Oops, what's that mean? It's different than conformity. That has an overtone of a legal requirement, which means that it could have some fines or other penalties attached to it if you are grossly negligent. So I'm saying that whatever you're in, you need to make sure for your product and what's applicable to you that you have technical checklists to verify compliance, not conformity, compliance to regulated requirements.
Yeah, and evaluation of compliance is part of the standards anyway. It's sort of clearer in 14,001 and 45,001 in clause 9 under your performance evaluation. So evaluation or compliance evaluation in quality, and Greg, you might expand on this further. I know in clause 8.1 they talk about identifying your statutory and regulatory requirements. So bang, that's your product and services. So I've sort of gone lower. And again, though, in clause 9.1, it's about monitoring, measurement, evaluation, and analysis. So to me, this regulated side of any business falls under certain parts within a management system.
Want me to pick that up, Michael?
Sure, absolutely, please.
Well, first of all, for a lot of our audience who might not be American, FDA stands for Food and Drug Administration, NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and DOT, Department of Transportation. So there are various regulatory agencies that have either statutory or what we would call administrative rules that companies have to comply with. And so what's the role of an internal auditor? The role of an internal auditor at the basic level is to ensure compliance and conformity, just like Bud was talking about. At a higher level, which is what Jackie brought up, is there's really 3 levels of what we would call assurance. There's the level down here, which what we would call product or transactional. The second level was what we would call programmatic, process, or project-based. And at the highest level is what we would call the enterprise level. And the internal auditor should basically look at 3 different levels and essentially see if there's compliance, conformance, and essentially at the highest level is the system of internal controls effective and efficient and economic so that they are complying to the customers or the auditee's risk appetite. Now, what I just said is really geeky, and there's a whole bunch I can spend days talking about. But that at the enterprise level, the client of the audit is really looking for is the system of controls, effective, economic, and efficient, and is it within the risk appetite of the organization?
Mm.
Okay, so if the person asks, if Amanda asks more, I can give her, or we can talk offline.
Mhm.
So Greg, do you mind if I throw something out there?
Please, yes, sir.
So in the organization, if
Yes, sir.
you find out that they are not complying with the regulatory requirement, by the regulatory requirement, who in that organization is responsible for that? Does this get into fiduciary?
Yeah, you start using words like fiduciary and regulatory and adequate, suitable, and other words that have a lot of legal significance. In my world, it's reasonableness. The word reasonable to an organization, to the 3 main parties in audit, the customer, the auditee, and the auditor, all have to have some definition, commonality of reasonableness. Because when you get to the higher level assurance audits, like an opinion, a legal opinion, it all comes down to reasonable. What's reasonable risk? What are reasonable controls? Is the system of controls reasonable within the risk appetite of the organization or the customer.
Right.
You're absolutely right. I don't want to get too complex about this, but it really comes down to what is reasonable in terms of the organization. Now, if you have a fiduciary requirement that is, or regulatory, you're either on or you're off. Meaning,
And I think,
you comply or you don't comply. Zero.
and I think from folks in our position, at least certainly for me, I would want to use the word reasonable because I'm not a lawyer, and that doesn't have the same implications as some of the other words would.
Our interface very often is legal. And what we do, and we spend a quarter probably of the time with the client shaping, framing all these issues that we've discussed. Which level are we going to be looking at? How deep are we going to be looking at? What level of assurance does the client want? What level of controls are required? And what's the risk appetite? That's one of many, many questions. And that's why negotiating all this on the front end, on the planning side, is so important.
I'd like
That's why
to,
these audits take so much time.
I'd like to, if I could, kind of take this that we're talking about and reframe it a little bit, because what I'm hearing, what I'm thinking about, and as I'm listening to all three of you talk so eloquently about what you foresee in the future, is the idea that people who are listening to us right now, auditors, really need to understand and take control themselves, and a lot of this is really incumbent upon them themselves to chart their own career paths, because everything you're talking about, I mean, I think a lot of what we're talking about now may be, and I'm not denigrating anybody, but because it's over my head, definitely, but I think it's maybe a little bit over the head of some people that are auditing right now and doing this work, and say, well, do I have to do that? Do I want to do that? Do I want to think about consulting? Do I want to stay as an auditor? And I think, to me, the takeaway is yes to all of it. I mean, you need to chart your own course in the future, because there's not going to be a paternalism anymore for anybody, any employment, but it's certainly not in this space, I think, in the auditing space. Is that fair? Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. I think a lot of this is going out and being proactive and seeking knowledge.
Right.
Because in my role, if I go on an audit and I didn't learn anything on an audit after seems like 100 years, I think you know what I mean. Yeah, so it's been a long time I've been auditing. If I don't learn something, I should not be auditing.
Yeah.
Every audit is something different. And you might have been over something 100 times at different places, but something's different about this company, right? And it's another thing. So, I mean, it's a fantastic thing to grow your mind and your capabilities, but never think you shouldn't go out and find something to look at as far as knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I always be learning and be curious. I think I use that a lot with my team here. And when they're getting a bit stressed, when things aren't going to plan, it's like, it's okay. Just ask questions, be curious, like enjoy the process, because as soon as you start stressing about it, you're not open to what you might be able to learn and understand. And I think that's a good segue, sorry, Mike, to training as well. And this is what I'm trying to learn also from you guys, is, okay, what can we provide that's different, moving people forward to the future of auditing with the training that we provide, because it isn't just, as we pointed out, that it is the technical stuff that's always been there, but what else is it? How can we help them to move forward, make those decisions, support them along the way? That is something that I'm finding in the training space, is that our students want that ongoing contact with experts. So, that traditional classroom training, for instance, And I never realized that probably until this year or last year, is that, you know, you do your standard classroom training, you know, assessments, see you later. That's the end of it.
Right.
It's like,
How about
Okay.
some training or competencies in some of the new technologies being used, right?
Excellent.
yeah,
There's a lot of articles I read about that is, you know, that you have to be competent on Zoom. It seems,
Yep.
you know, pretty easy. Then you have maybe the possibility of digital cameras. I did an audit overseas in the Scandinavian countries, and they have the remote vision glasses. And that was the first time I saw that. I thought those were really cool. You get a lot of information from that. How about, what do you all think about the possibility of drones being used in auditing?
oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it brings up some security issues too, though. I mean, you need to be aware of that too. I mean, it's always those problems. Balance of the advances and the obstacles to the advancements at the same time.
Well, they're already using drones, or here, that's all I know, in Australia, for like site inspections, like oil and gas. So, you know, rather than physically going on site, which is probably like 6-7 hour drive west from here in Brisbane, they actually have a centre here in Brisbane where they fly the drones over the oil and gas field. They take video, photos, and then report back. So and this was pre-COVID that I came across this. So I don't think it's a huge leap.
Like big laydown yards, right? If you're dealing with pipe, there's a lot of pipe in the oil and gas industry, and you can look at storage conditions. You can look at how high they're chopped up. You can look at probably get down to the identification if you can fly that low, right?
Yeah.
And get that information as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to jump in and just say we've got about 20 minutes to go in this session, folks. So if you do want to get your questions in, please get them in and send them on to us so we have a chance to pose them to our team, because we are going to stop after an hour.
Michael, can I say
I
something?
was just going to say, Greg, why don't you jump right in?
So we talked about risk-based auditing, I think, being the future, because that's the requirement per ISO 19011. And I think when you're going to start doing those type of audits, there are going to be a lot of what we would call opportunities for trainers, for consultants, for even companies. For example, quality, we have the PDCA cycle, the old Deming type of cycle. In our world, which is the risk world, we have to actually design risk controls for an organization. So if we're coming in as a consultant, consultative type of engagement, we actually design their controls. And the PDCA cycle or PDCSA cycle doesn't work for us. What we have to do is actually architect a control system, design it, deploy it, and assure it. That's our equivalent for a PDCA cycle. And that type of architect, design, deploy, and assure is what we use almost for any type of ISO type of system. The second thing we do is we use what we would call the 4 Ps when we design risk controls, not only for transactional or product, but for process, programmatic, and for the organization. That's where the architecture comes in. We actually have a series of different type of risk controls. And it's really important to understand, because anytime we're living in a risk area, in a risk time frame, where the threshold for all decision making and for all problem solving is through the risk lens. So we have to be very critical about that. It's not going to be quality anymore. It's really going to be risk lens. And in that risk lens, we want to be proactive, preventive, predictive, and preemptive. And it's a new type of thinking when you move into the risk area. And that's going to require training. And I think that's going to create a lot of opportunities for consultants, CB, certification bodies, as well as first, second, and third party auditors. So as we move over into this new risk arena, especially because of COVID and supply chain risks, the lens for everything is going to be risk-based problem solving, risk-based decision making.
And it seems, and this could just be just the way it seems, but it seems that the risks are riskier, I guess you'd want to say, today than they ever have been before. You mentioned supply chain, you mentioned pandemics, you mentioned we certainly have a lot of conflict, economic risk. I mean, there's a lot of risk in the world today. Climate change, I mean, there's a lot of things happening that we need to be aware of. And I don't think auditors can turn their minds away from that.
And that's why we think it's a great opportunity to be a risk-based auditor and double your salary.
That's the takeaway is, and that's the truth is that I think, we don't want to have it be a commoditization, as Bud and I were talking about a few moments ago. We want it to be a career in which people can chart their own course and they can feel like they have some degree of control. It's not a race to the bottom, which I think, unfortunately, it can feel that way sometimes across the market, that, maybe auditors don't get enough respect for their important role in helping to, not consult, but to help call balls and strikes and to make sure that the companies are getting output that is quality, good output. That's a very important role.
Mm-hmm.
And it always will be. I mean, it's never going to not be a need for better output. I don't care who's doing the work, even if it's robots. We're still going to need to call balls and strikes and make it better than it is already.
That's right.
So I guess looking at this and looking at the future, I mean, certainly technology is an area we haven't really talked too much about. We talked a little bit about it, touched a bit on it in terms of some of the remote audits. There was a lot of conversation not that many years ago, just like there was with working from home, that people said, well, sub-optimized to do a remote audit, it's sub-optimized to work from home. But, we found that it really isn't. So, I mean, are people going to need to be on the road? I mean, maybe you will sometimes, but in the future, are people going to need to be on the road even half the time that they were 10 years ago?
I think, if I think back to when I started auditing, it was in the nuclear industry. And I think back about reviewing a supplier's quality manual and handwriting in ink the checklist. Do y'all remember those days? And the scary part is, back then we didn't know what we didn't know, right?
Yeah.
And every audit was a bumpy audit until you start figuring it out, right? And so I think we're at those crossroads in a way, but now we have new methods of teaching, right? New methods of getting folks to understand, new technology to use. So I think in a way it's easier but more complex to audit. And so I think that's really where the future is understanding what some of these things are that we need to know about.
How do we do that? I mean, technology is use of technology and understanding these things is somewhat outside the bounds of traditional auditor training. Maybe it shouldn't be.
Think about preparation, right? So if you look at preparation, one of the things I do, especially if I'm going overseas, is I use Google Earth, right? It gives me an idea about what size that site's on and do I have enough auditors if I'm working for a customer that's wanting me to train the auditors as we're out there. And I remember some steel mills I looked at and I'm going like, no way, not in a week. There's that kind of thing. And then there's social media, right? That's kind of a recent event. Then you have the websites that the customer sometimes put out too much information, like for the audit, especially if you're doing any kind of a compliance audit. Then you have, customer complaints. You have different reporting bureaus. If you had a good means of searching, you can learn a lot of information. Some of it may be really good about new products, new designs, new press releases, and with that, you can go back and say, did you go through your design? Did you do this? Did you do that? Or maybe such not good information. Are they reporting that? Did they have a way to mitigate that? Are they going to improve the process that created that issue? So there's a plethora of tools out there for us to use. It takes a little bit longer, but I think it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it is all about that preparation. A lot of that I have on my audit preparation checklist, like going through like reviews as well, like type in the company name reviews, which is like what we do before we purchase anything. So that's always a good way to find, well, what's actually going on out there. But definitely what they're spruiking on their website as well. Yeah, I actually follow a lot of my clients either on Facebook or LinkedIn. So I get to see all of their releases and just keep up with what's happened in that 12 months since I was there from the last audit. So I'm aware of what new products or changes or issues possibly that may have occurred.
Good point.
Absolutely. Part of that planning too is if you're traveling internationally is looking at Department of State,
Yep.
right? Getting yourselves registered with the embassy there. And I mean, there's just another 24 things to do to keep yourself safe.
So if I'm hearing you properly, you're thinking that traveling is still going to be a big part of this career going forward.
For those people who are really key in some areas, right? So, I mean, with the oil and gas producers, they want contractual auditors. They want technical auditors. They don't want the ISO process. I want to see right up what technical things you're going to look at. So the question is like, what do you mean? But it's technical processes. You know, we had a crack in a test specimen. Why did we have a crack? Why didn't they report to us? So did they say that was okay because one out of so many were cracked, or how did they do it? And then that kind of unzipped the whole can or several cans of worms for different people in the supply chain, different companies in the supply chain. But when you come back and look at a technical audit in concurrence with a quality management system audit, it's a different picture, different landscape.
Well, folks, we're getting toward the end. I want to let all of us all three of you make a kind of a closing statement, if you will, about what, again, I'd like to bring it back as much as we can to the folks that are watching us and what takeaway, what real high level bit of information would you really want people to walk away from this session with, knowing what you think they need to know about this profession in the future? And Greg, I'm going to start with you.
Oh boy. I think that the future is going to be risk-based auditing. I think consulting wise, in terms of that, there's going to be a big need for companies and for people to design and architect risk-based systems, control systems. And I think there's going to be more traveling because nowadays, just if you're going to do a risk-based audit, you have to be on site, gather enough evidence so that you can prove there's a 95% confidence level that the controls are in place, economic, and working effectively. And to get that type of evidence, you have to be on the site, looking at things, taking a sample of a large population of items. And you can't do that remotely. That's my last thought, I think.
Bud, what would you say to that?
I definitely think everything Greg is saying is true. I mean, this goes under the so learn technology. So learning technology is how are we doing audits? Learn new methods. And I think, Greg, you're saying something really cool about risk. And in fact, I'm going to pursue that with you later to find out more about it.
Absolutely.
And I think it's great. And then in addition to that is seek different certifications in different management system standards. So you can go after an integrated certification, learn technical information about the fields that you want to be in. Like the individual said about the 3 different industries that they're in, and the regulatory bodies looking over them, that'd be a good place to start. And in addition to that, it's really important to be relentless in your pursuit, right? Don't stop learning. If you don't keep on chasing that, you're going to drop off and become passe as you're auditing. And it's going to show, right?
Yeah,
your lack of interest is going to show.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Jackie, last word to you, Jackie.
That's a good segue for me because yeah, I'm sort of on that similar sort of bandwagon there. With Bud is like my big word is stay curious. I do think that there is still a place for remote auditing. Obviously, it will be in balance with on-site as we are released from, you know, what the restrictions that we have currently. But I think the big thing that I've noticed is that it's now accepted to work from home. That's a huge thing I've noticed even with my clients that have moved to moving all of their staff to work from home to replace staff. People are demanding that I want to work from home because it's so much more accepted. We have since 2013, since we went live with our online training, our team have always worked from home. We used to hide it. We were embarrassed because we thought we weren't portraying this international global company that we were. So we used to hide it. But now it's so accepted. With coming with that though, working from home, there's other health and safety risks that as workers and employers we have to be aware of as well. So it's not just safety, it's mental health as well, that isolation. So please be aware of that. But again, coming back to auditing, I think absolutely agree with Greg and Bud, the technical stuff, getting your competency, but be a real person, be relatable. And you can do that remotely as well. I think it's a bit more challenging remotely than in person. But I think please be aware of being a real person, someone that's comfortable with you, because you will only get the best out of your client and auditee by being that person.
Wonderful. Excellent point. Excellent points, all of you. Thank you so much for what was a really great session. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have on this hour. On behalf of Exemplar Global, I want to offer our very sincere thanks again to Greg Hutchins, Bud Waitman, and Jackie Stapleton for joining us today and giving us some really thought-provoking ideas about what the future of auditing means. If you're watching this on demand and you didn't have a chance to get your question in, you can email me, Mike Richman, at mrichman, that's M-R-I-C-H-M-A-N, at exemplarglobal.org, and then I'll pass your questions along to Jackie, Bud, and Greg, as the case may be. And before we go, I want to remind you all to be sure you purchase your CPD for this your CPD certificate for this session. You can do that right there on your screen. Please go ahead and do that when you can. Great. Well, then, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our panelists for a great session. We'll see you next time here at the Future of Auditing Expo. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.